We have to ask ourselves, why does my 13-year-old classroom look the same as my classroom did 100 years ago when I was in 8th grade? Why haven't we taken advantage of an infrastructure switch where now we have all the world's information at our fingertips? How do we take advantage of technology as opposed to whether or not we should be using it at all? When you think about education, it's about taking information and converting it into intelligence. And now we have all that information at our fingertips. How do we take advantage of that? Now, we've been talking about technology in education for a very long time. Motion pictures were going to revolutionize education. TVs were going to revolutionize education. Sesame Street was going to revolutionize education. Elmo was going to... We've been talking about this for a long time. We've been talking about computers in education since the 60s. I remember I had to take a computer class. I think it was the 8th or 9th grade. 9th grade. I took a computer class where I learned how to code and program in BASIC, and I wrote like 500 pages of code to make a bird fly across the screen on a Commodore 64. Remember that program? And I had to take that computer class. So we've been talking about putting computers in education forever. It's a long time. So what's different this time? I think 3 things. First is all the evidence and research that we have about what learning can be and what learning should be, right? How it can be personalized, how learning can be relevant and engaging, how we take students and help them learn from each other and collaborate, and all the things that we have and all the research that we've done over the last 40 years about what learning can do. I think technology can help us implement. Right? I think technology can help us enable and support those learning models that we're trying to build in education. And so learning has changed from how we view it, and we can use technology to support that. The second thing that's happened is the way in which we use technology in our everyday lives, right? Compared to when I took a computer class back in 9th grade 100 years ago, right? How many of you have not used technology today? Right. How many of you have not used the web today? Right. You're not, you're kidding. It's because the court order. Giselle is messing with me over here. We use technology like most of the time before the crusties in our eyeballs, get out in the morning when we get on the internet or on our phones to check email or the weather or whatever it is that we do. I mean, do you remember that we used to have to call the internet? That took a while to sink in. With our home phones, and the internet was busy, and it would hang up on you. Or, you get a busy signal, reach the internet, and try a different number. That was our experience with the internet. And what was our reward for that experience? It was a bunch of pages that had words, to links that had words, to links that had words. That was our reward. And every once in a while, someone on one of those pages would post a picture, and you'd lose your mind, right? There's a picture coming. There was a picture coming. And then you're like, I have to wait 20 minutes, but there's a picture coming. Right? That was our experience with technology, but it wasn't that long ago. Right? The iPhone is 7 years old. The BlackBerry, which is a dinosaur now, is like 12 years old. Right? We've been using technology so much that we haven't even recognized how quickly that happened to us. Right? And if that's true for us, what does that mean for a generation of kids who are growing up not knowing that the world existed before Google, or before smartphones, or before tablets, or before Wi-Fi, right? I mean, how many kids that live in connected homes just assume that every home comes with Wi-Fi, right? And the first thing they ask for is a password wherever they go to their friend's house. We've been growing up where technology happened to us, where this generation of kids, technology is just part of their life. It's part of their infrastructure. And I'm not saying that they're different than we are. It's very important to point out and not pay attention to anyone who would stand here and tell you that this generation is different than we are, that they're wired differently, that they do things differently, that they can do 4 things at the same time. They can't. They do 4 things at the same time poorly, just like we do 4 things at the same time poorly. But how they think about learning is different, so much so that we have to remind ourselves almost daily of this. A couple of years ago, we went on our family vacation to Hawaii. Now, I did not travel, like I said. I grew up in Hell's Kitchen on food stamps and welfare, and so vacations were not something that I experienced, but I want my kids to experience this. So every year, we pick a place, we take 3 weeks, and we go explore. And a couple years ago, we went to Hawaii. Never been, wanted to go, and my daughter's terrified of flying, which is always a big issue, which is kind of ironic since I fly so much. Terrified of flying, especially over water, she loses her mind. What do you do? So like any good parent, I drugged her up and bribed her and said that when we get to Hawaii, you can get a ukulele. She's a musician. She plays instruments. She's very creative, and she wanted a ukulele. So we're in the ukulele store, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye, instruction books and videos on how to play the ukulele. And so how did I learn how to do things? That way. And so I said, hey, do you want to get an instruction book or a video on how to play the ukulele? And think about my position and where I am, and I'm saying this out loud. And she looked at me with such disdain, like, what's wrong with you, right? Why? How is she going to learn to play ukulele? Right, but we block YouTube in schools, right? The power of how they learn is different, and we always have to remind, because I didn't learn that way. This generation of kids is learning in a different way. This is my 13-year-old who is showing me his lines of code because he taught himself how to code in Java because he played a game called Minecraft, and he wanted to build a mod, and so he had to learn how to do Java and do JavaScripts, and so he can code this, and now he's building his mods inside Minecraft. Never talk to me about it. I don't want him learning Java. I want him learning Python. But never talk to me about it. I never ask me where to go get information. We assume that people can teach us. We assume that we have to wait for someone to teach us how to do something. This generation does not assume that, right? They just find a place to learn. And it's not that one way is better than the other, it's just different. And we always have to remind ourselves. This generation gets a bad rap in terms of technology, right? I was doing a search, and I've been doing a lot of research on this generation, Generation Z, right? The 4 to 18-year-olds in our country right now. And the books that you find and the articles, like the unsocial generation, the they don't look in your eyes. Somebody wrote a New York Times article that set me off around, this is a fair warning. If your kid, if I speak to your kid, I'm going to teach them how to shake hands and look in my eye. Like my kid doesn't do that, right? So they get a bad reputation, and when reality is that technology is just part of their infrastructure, just part of their lives, just like the things that were part of our lives were part of our lives. That's how we have to look at it. And instead of looking at whether or not they should be using technology, we should be asking how they use technology, and we should be asking how do we take advantage of the fact that they don't know any better, right? How do we do that? So one of the things that I do when I talk to students, and I try to talk to as many students as I possibly can, I love to visit schools, I love to get students into an auditorium, especially students who are growing up the way I grew up, right? Where in a bad social economic environment where I can say to them, look, if I can do this, you can do this, right? And be able to say to them, your point of view, your perspective, your experiences are fundamentally competitive advantage because you're going to have a different point of view when you make it into the world, right? When you have that role, when you're doing the things that you want to do. The other reason that I talk to students is because I think that we ask our students the wrong questions, or we talk to them about the wrong things when we think about the old economy and the old education model. I cringe anytime that someone asks my 13-year-old, what do you want to be when you grow up? One, there's a really good chance that the job doesn't exist. And two, how does he know that he wants to be a biomedical engineer, right? Or someone to work with banana plastics to create, better pesticides for fruits, right? How does he know how to figure that out? So instead of asking our students, what do you want to be when you grow up, I want to ask our students, what problem do you want to solve, right? What spins in your head? And it doesn't have to be solving world hunger. It could be solving world hunger, but it could also be, making cars go faster, or with more fuel efficiency, or making blenders quieter, or vacuum cleaners quieter, right? It can be any problem. The process of problem solving is what I want them to focus on. Because when we ask that question, what problem do you want to solve, we can then ask them the follow-up question, which is, what do you think the knowledge, skills, and abilities are to solve that problem? Where do you go get those knowledge, skills, and abilities? From a technology perspective, who do you follow online? What classes can you take? What online materials out there? What videos can you watch? And so on, and so on, and so on. And you also do something else when you ask a student what problem you want to solve. You've gone from what do you want to be when you grow up, aka who do you want to go work for, to what problem you want to solve, what is your purpose? How do you build autonomy? And then how do you create mastery to solve that problem, right? So it's a different way to ask a question. So I want to make sure our students become lifelong learning problem solvers, right? And that's our focus. I also talk to students about this idea of iteration. We like to say we need to teach our kids how to fail, that kids need to learn from failure. Actually, kids need to learn from successes too. There is no endpoint. We live in an economy where we have consistent and constant iteration. If you used Google last night and then use it again today, there's a really good chance you use a different version of Google. Facebook, for those of you who visited Facebook, it's the same thing. They update Facebook, every couple of weeks, just like we update Google a couple times a day. For those of you who are IT administrators, and I can always tell because you always have a frown on your face when you look at me, because we update Google Apps, 200, 250 times a year, and you get all frustrated. For those of you who train, you hate me too, right? Because the material always has to be refreshed. Iteration is the economy of the future, and we have to teach our kids how to iterate, that there is no endpoint. You're here in the Valley. One of my favorite teachers in the Valley here is Esther Wojcicki, who teaches at Palo Alto High. And she teaches a journalism class, and I don't think in the 30 years that she's taught there that she's ever given anything but an A, right? She gives all her students A's because there is no B in the real world. There is no C in the real world, right? She gives an assignment, the student builds it, hands it back, and she provides feedback and edits, and then the student takes it and recreates it or redoes it until they get it right. And so she's always handing out A's. And if you think about that, it makes sense in the real world, right? I mean, imagine someone on my team handing me a paper or a strategy, and I looked at it and said, yeah, this is about a C+. Thanks. Good luck with your next assignment, right? I would hand that back to them and say, this is what the feedback is, and this is what you need to build. And we would go back and forth until you finalize it. That's iteration. It's this constant iteration. There is no endpoint to what we're building. So we want to make sure our students focus on iteration. I also talk to students about collaboration. We talk about collaboration in education a lot, but we don't really mean it. Because the way education is set up, it's set up as a single-player sport. The problem is we live in a team-based world. It's my 13-year-old who gets homework, who gets assignments, who takes tests, and then, when he graduates, we say, all right, good luck, go work with others. Real collaboration is what we need to be able to teach our kids. Imagine as teachers, you handed out a test to my 13-year-old's 8th grade classroom, and you said, and at the end of the test, 2 kids came up holding that test together, saying, we decided to combine our skill set and work on this together. What would your reaction be? And again, flip that into my world. Imagine me going to Larry and Sergey going, here's the global education strategy. I did it all by myself. No, I swear I did not talk to any of the other teams. I didn't get their input or feedback. No, it's all me. I did it all by myself. We don't live in that world. So how do we teach our kids real collaboration, that their part is part of a greater sum? And I'm not talking about group work, right, where you take a paper that gets split up by 5 people who have to work on 5 different sections that can easily be done by one person. I'm talking about real collaboration where your part, if it's not there, is missing, right? Where your part is part of a greater sum real collaboration where you know that you're going to get good feedback from someone. Real collaboration where, you ask really good questions and actively listen, right? Real collaboration is what we want to make sure are focused on our kids, because in our world, and if you think about the places that you visited, they look like they're working as individuals, but they're working as individuals for their part of a greater sum. And we want to make sure our students are doing the same thing. And then I want to make sure that we're building digital leaders, not just digital citizens. Citizenship is the minimum requirement for the new economy. What we want to make sure is that we build students who know how to vet information, who know how to analyze and search and do all the things that we need to do with information, that know that they have a digital footprint, that their brand, if you will, or their perspective and what they write and what they have is a digital footprint of who they are. Digital citizenship is the minimum requirement. We want them to be leaders in this space, not just followers. We want them to create things, not just consume information. So we want to make sure that we're building digital leaders. And, if you think about it, most of us, whether you admit it or not, you're terrible searchers. I've seen the logs. You're terrible. Yes, your specific logs. I've looked at your individual. Here's a self-assessment for your, talk about professional development. If you type a question mark in a search bar, you're a terrible searcher. And if we're bad, what does that mean for our kids? Who's teaching them, right? And if we're not doing it in schools, where are they going to learn these skills for this future economy that includes technology and having a digital footprint? The good news is that we can free educators from being the Google in the room. You no longer have to be the Google in the room. That's taken care of. At one point in history, it made sense. It made sense when you asked me, what happened on December 7th, 1941, and I didn't know. I'd say, I'll be back tomorrow. I'll go find out. And I had to ask someone, and there's a credibility issue right there. Or I had to go look at an encyclopedia, and an encyclopedia it's a printed version of Wikipedia. Okay. Or look at an encyclopedia for that information, right? That was important to have that information in the classroom so that we can save time. We no longer have to do that. A couple months ago was President's Day, and I saw a stat that kind of floored me. It said that 7% of Americans can name the first 4 presidents of the United States. Ooh, there was a vibe change right here. People started looking down at their stuff, pointing to that person. Now, I can change the dynamic in this room by pointing to one of you and asking you to name me the first 4 presidents. And if you don't know, for the rest of the day, you're going to be the idiot who didn't know who the first 4 presidents are, even though the person who's calling you an idiot didn't know themselves. Right? Or I can give all of you 30 seconds, and all of you can tell me who the first 4 presidents are. Information becomes a commodity in that space. Information does not have any value. What is valuable is how do we take that information and convert it into intelligence? And as teachers, that's our responsibility, is to help students take that information and convert it into intelligence by asking follow-up questions. Tell me who the first 4 presidents are, and then tell me what their relationship was to each other. Tell me what they worked on together. Tell me what legislation they all supported. You can go on, but the point is that you can get deeper in the questions that we ask, not just asking kids to memorize things, because we don't live in that world anymore. So we can free teachers from being the Google in the room. Now, the good news is I'm starting to see this all over the world. I get a chance to visit schools all over the world, and it's exciting to see things like blended learning and personalized learning and flipped classrooms and whatever it is that we call it everywhere. The main theme that I see is a more student-engaged, student-centric model. And that's exciting. And so we are on the verge of creating what those learning models are going to look like for the future. And whether you like it or not, and you're an administrator or whether you're a teacher in this room, you are the generation that's designing and building what the new learning model will look like for generations to come. You're taking that old model and recreating what the new learning model looks like, the new education model for the future. And this is the generation that's doing that. And I'm starting to see that, and it's really exciting. And it's not just happening here in the Valley, it's happening across the world. in different communities all over the world. We're also starting to see, hopefully, more emphasis on the right professional development that our teachers need. You guys are going through this for the next couple of days, which is really exciting. But that focus on making sure that the teachers have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to help students thrive. Because at the end of the day, when that door closes, there's nothing that's more important to great education than having a great teacher in the classroom, right? And making sure that those teachers have the skills that they need to help those students is absolutely critical. I always like to say publicly that I do not believe that technology will replace teachers, ever. Why? Because I work for a very innovative company and I do not report to a laptop. I report to a real person who pushes me, who encourages me, who empowers me, who coaches me, who knows where my strengths are and my areas of development and helps guide me through that process. That's what we need our great educators to be, are strong empowers, people who help students think through knowledge, who coach, who mentor, who empower, all those things that we want to make sure our students do. Now, if all we do in education is make students memorize things and then test them to see if they've memorized those things, then yeah, I can do that with a laptop, I can do that with technology, but if we really want teachers to have that critical role around the things and the skills that students need to have, then technology can't help us do that. Technology is there to support and enable. It's not there to lead anything. Because there is no magic button to any of this. There's no magic solution. One of the issues that I find in education is I talk to superintendents or educators and they say, just show me a school that's doing it right and I'll just do what they're doing. Right? What's the model? Give me an example. You hear that a lot. But the reality is that it's all your individual school, your individual district. And what we need more than anything in education is a culture of iteration and innovation. Right? A culture of exactly what we were talking about earlier, which is this constant iteration, constant change, constant transformation that we do in the real world and just have that in our schools so that there is no end result of what education is, that we're constantly changing it, that it's no longer one model, but the future of education is a constant change. And how do we prepare ourselves to be able to do that? You're in the Valley, and right down the road, this is what Google looked like when it started. At Stanford, right? So this is the original Google.com. This is Larry and Sergey at Stanford putting a bunch of machines together and saying, let's do search in a different way. And this is how Google started. And then this is what Google looks like today. This is one picture of the gazillions of servers that we have all over the world that represent what this looked like. Now, two things to point out. One, this is not what Google looked like on Monday. And then this is what it looked like on Thursday. This took 15 years, or I think we're up to 16 years, of the same stuff we're talking about. Collaboration, communication, problem solving, critical thinking, iteration, innovation, all the things that we're talking about. It took 15 years to build this. And the second thing, which I think is more important, is that this is not what a data center will look like 15 years from today. If it does, then we're dead, right? It's the constant shift. It's like the little kid said in The Matrix, there is no spoon, right? There is no data center. This will look different 15 years from today, and I think that's what we need more than anything in education. Now, I talked a little bit about technology, but technology is not the silver bullet. I started off by saying that education is the silver bullet, and that technology is there to support and enable great education. I remember when Chromebooks rolled out, people were like, I need to see a Chromebook. Show me a Chromebook. I'm like, it's very anticlimactic. It's a web browser, right? The power wasn't on the front end. The power was on the back end, right, on what you do with these Chromebooks. When we launched Classroom, how many are you trying Classrooms in your school? All right, so if you're using Classroom in your schools, there was no professional development for Classroom. There was no training manual for Classroom. Most teachers picked up Classroom and instantly just started using it because they knew it was intuitive. They knew how to use it. That's our job, is to make those tools easy to use, easy to manage, easy to scale. And if we're not doing that, let me know, because that's what we want to make sure that we're doing. We don't want to complex the world too much. And the good news is that we're just getting started. In 1995, 1% of the world was online. It took 10 years to get to the first billion people, It took 5 years to get to the second billion, and it took 4 years to get to the third billion. And today we have 40% of the world online. We're just starting. This is just getting started. Technology is just getting to the point where it's easy to use, where Wi-Fi becomes something that just is out there. Access is an issue that we still need to deal with. The web, which is a baby, it's 25 years old in its current format. Again, we used to have to call the internet, and today, what's our expectation of technology from just a few short years ago, right? I've seen teachers, the nicest, the most pleasant, the most understanding people in the world to me, because, I can barely deal with my own kids. Imagine dealing with, I teach at the college level, and they're bad enough. I can't even imagine teaching like my 13-year-old. I've seen the nicest people in the world turn into a mob at conferences when the Wi-Fi wasn't good enough. Our expectations have changed. We're just getting started. This is a picture of a small team in Phoenix. That's me back there trying to hide in the background. We had an idea, and we launched this is the building of an inquiry-based school that we're building in Phoenix, in the Phoenix Union School District. It's going to be called, the working title is the Phoenix Code Academy. And we're going to do inquiry-based learning, and coding will be the language that kids learn for the 4 years that they're there, so they graduate from high school being able to code in 2 or 3 different languages and become lifelong global learners. And we're building this in a low-income Latino community in Phoenix, where when those kids graduate and walk across the stage to get the diploma, you're going to actually see actual movement in the number of minorities in computer science because it's so low, right? And so we are all just getting started doing our part in trying to think about what that future looks like. And I want to leave you with this thought. We talked about your technology that you're using. So think about that technology, whether it's your iPhone, your iPad, or your Samsung phone, the Edge phone, or whatever it's called. Or for me, it's the Nexus 6, which my wife calls a mini tablet. Right? And then I want you to think about a 5-year-old. And then I want you to realize that this technology is the worst technology that 5-year-old will ever see in their life. This is their Commodore 64. In 20 years, they're going to be, hanging out in San Francisco, being hipsters, and they're going to find this in the 50-cent box at the thrift store. And they're going to buy it because they want to hang it on their wall like a museum piece, like we hang old technology on our walls. And they're going to think, and they're 5 years old, so they're going to have some memories. They're going to remember, oh, my dad used to have one of these. And they're going to say, look how thick it is and how heavy it is. And they're going to say, oh, I totally remember. He used to have to plug this into the wall every day. Those are the 5-year-olds who are starting in our school system this year. Do we have the right infrastructure for them? How do we take advantage of the fact they don't know any better? How do we create a personalized, student-centric learning environment so that they can thrive for the future that's completely uncertain, to solve problems that some we haven't even defined yet or have no solutions for? That's what we're all working towards. That's what we are here to do. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you, Anthony and the team, for inviting me, and have a great event. Thank you, guys.